At exactly 0317 hours on March 22, 2026, in the pitch-black void of the Indian Ocean, the sky above the Chagos archipelago was split open by the brightest explosion in the history of Diego Garcia Atoll. Two Iranian Shahab 3 Block 4 ballistic missiles, fired from mobile transporter erector launchers concealed in the Zagros mountain foothills, nearly 4,400 kilometers away, detonated in near-simultaneous impacts on the northwestern taxiway of the joint U.S.-UK airbase. The blast craters were 18 meters deep. 3B, 2 Spirit stealth bombers, parked in the open dispersal area, were engulfed in fire. A fuel storage berm ignited. Within 90 seconds, a column of black smoke was visible on satellite infrared from 800 kilometers away. Diego Garcia, the most remote and strategically impregnable fortress in the entire U.S. power projection architecture, an island base that had launched air campaigns in the Gulf War, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and multiple strike packages against Afghanistan, had just been hit. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, the United States had sustained a ballistic missile strike on a major military installation. The era of untouchable rear echelon bases was over. Simultaneously, and this was not a coincidence, at 0319 hours Jerusalem time, air raid sirens erupted across Tel Aviv, Haifa, Beersheba, and the occupied Golan Heights. Iranian air defense tracking data, intercepted by the NSA Sijan constellation, confirmed what no U.S. intelligence analyst wanted to believe. Tehran had launched 9 separate ballistic missile salvos in a coordinated time-on-target attack designed to overwhelm the Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow, 3 battery networks simultaneously. The tactical geometry was deliberate. Each salvo originated from a different launch vector: southwestern Iran, eastern Syria via proxy launchers embedded in Deir ez-Zor, Hezbollah positions in the Bekaa Valley, and 3 clusters of Fateh. 313 short-range ballistic missiles fired from Lebanese soil in a joint operation that Hezbollah had been quietly coordinating for 72 hours without a single detectable command signal. The IRGC Aerospace Force had gone dark on all standard communication frequencies, using a burst transmission protocol that rendered NSA SIGINT collection essentially blind for the 11 critical minutes preceding launch. That blind window was not an accident. It was the result of 6 months of electronic warfare preparation. What followed in the next 47 minutes would redefine the nature of modern air defense, test the limits of Aegis architecture, and bring the global oil market to its knees in real time. Inside the Combined Air Operations Center at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Lieutenant General Mark Oviatt watched the threat picture on the primary tactical display system with the controlled, surgical calm of a man who had been briefed on precisely this scenario 3 weeks earlier. Every incoming track was already plotted. The Link 16 tactical data network was feeding targeting solutions at 500 milliseconds per cycle. David Sling batteries in the Negev had automatically slewed there and /MPQ 65 fire control radars toward the highest altitude threat clusters. Arrow 3 interceptors, exo-atmospheric, hypersonic, designed specifically to kill ballistic missiles in space, began a sequential launch sequence from 2 sites near Jerusalem and 1 classified position in the northern Galilee. But the Iranians had anticipated the Israeli interceptor geometry. Buried inside the first 3 missile salvos were decoy warheads, inert steel-cored RVs emitting identical radar cross-sections to the live warheads using corner reflectors and electronic skin track enhancers. For every live Shahab or Ahmad RV descending at Mach 7 toward population centers, 2 decoys were consuming Arrow, 3 interceptors at $3.5 million per shot. The battery managers inside the Israeli Air Defense Command Network ran the numbers in real time. By Salvo 4, the arithmetic was stark. They were burning interceptors at a 3-to-1 ratio against live warheads. The magazines were not infinite. The situation, classified as Threkin Alpha Plus at 0331 hours, was being managed on the razor's edge of catastrophic saturation failure. At the same time, 3,000 kilometers south, the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group was operating at Enkin Alpha, complete electromagnetic silence, in the northern Arabian Sea, 240 nautical miles south of Ras Al Had, Oman. On the flag bridge, Rear Admiral Christine Caldwell had been awake for 31 hours. The strike package or air wing had just executed against the Iranian ballistic missile production complex at Sharad, a joint B-21 divided by F divided by a -18E operation that destroyed 3 horizontal assembly buildings and the cryogenic propellant loading facility, had gone exactly as planned. But the Diego Garcia impact report now coming across the Cypernet terminal changed everything. The Roosevelt's battle group was no longer the hunter. It was the next target. CENTCOM's fleet tracking architecture, the theater ballistic missile defense overlay embedded in the Joint Tactical Ground Station Network, had identified 22 mobile Iranian transporter erector launchers repositioning south of the Bandar Abbas coastal corridor. They were deploying toward firing positions that placed the entire northern Arabian Sea within range of the Sejl. 2 medium-range ballistic missile, a road-mobile, solid-fueled system with a circular error probability of under 30 meters, specifically designed after studying U.S. carrier strike group tactical maneuvering patterns. Iranian doctrine had war-gamed a carrier-kill scenario for 11 years. The U.S. Navy had war-gamed surviving it for 12. Admiral Caldwell made the call. She ordered the strike group into a high-speed south-southwest transit at 28 knots, maximum sustainable speed, for the cruiser USS Bunker Hill and the 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers USS Michael Mansour and USS Delbert D. Black, placing the formation outside the Sejl, 2 maximum range envelope, while the /Spy 6V, 1 air and missile defense radar arrays on all 3 surface combatants entered active search and track mode. At the same time, she ordered 2 SSN 797 Virginia-class submarines, already operating at depth in the outer patrol zone, to close the coast at maximum submerged sprint speed and prepare Standard Missile 6 over-the-horizon intercept solutions against the repositioning TEL columns. Killing a mobile ballistic missile launcher before it fires is exponentially more cost-effective than intercepting its warhead at re-entry. The U.S. Navy knew this. And now, 22 Iranian crews driving their TEL vehicles south on Route 96 toward the coast were about to learn it. The lethal geometry closed at 0358 hours. The USS Vermont SSN 792, a Block 4 Virginia-class operating at 600 feet beneath the surface of the Gulf of Oman, raised its mast for 4.3 seconds, long enough to receive a single encrypted targeting burst from the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, circling at altitude 80 miles to the east. The burst contained GPS coordinates and current velocity vectors for 6 of the 22 repositioning TELs, triangulated by a combination of overhead NRO satellite synthetic aperture radar and a shadowing RQ, for Global Hawk operating at 60,000 feet, with its AESA imaging array locked to the convoy. 6 seconds later, the Vermont returned to depth. The targeting solution was already uploaded to 6 Tomahawk Block V missiles, sitting in the vertical launch tubes of the bow section. The Tomahawk Block V, the most recent variant, equipped with an imaging infrared seeker capable of discriminating between a missile launcher and a civilian fuel truck at a resolution of 15 centimeters, had been designed for exactly this scenario. Maritime Strike Variant, Terminal Phase Active Guidance, Impact Time programmed to arrive simultaneously on all 6 vehicles within a 4-second window to deny any crew the opportunity to observe an impact and abort the launch sequence. The cruise missiles were in the air before a single Iranian radar operator knew the Vermont was in the region. At 0412 hours, 6 consecutive infrared detonations lit up the coastal highway south of Minab like a string of suns. 6 TL vehicles, each carrying between 2 and 4 launch-ready Sejl 2 missiles, ceased to exist in a total elapsed time of 3.8 seconds. The Keshem Island radar station picked up the Bloom signatures. The IRGC Aerospace Force Command at Imam Ali Central Air Defense Base hit their emergency communication protocols. But the Vermont was already at depth, already reloading. The confrontation was metastasizing in every domain simultaneously. In the electromagnetic spectrum, the Iranian Electronic Warfare Campaign, Operation SABS-SHAB, or Green Knight, a codename recovered from a captured IRC signals officer 3 weeks earlier, was designed as a multi-layer attack against U.S. GPS-dependent precision guidance infrastructure. Iranian Kaman, 22 jamming aircraft, operating in sovereign Iranian airspace, beyond the reach of carrier-based fighters, without tanker support, were broadcasting high-power GPS denial signals across all L1 and L2 frequency bands in a 400-kilometer radius. The intent was to degrade the terminal phase accuracy of incoming Tomahawk and JSSMER strikes, forcing them to revert to inertial navigation systems with CEPs measured in tens of meters rather than single digits. At the same time, Iranian cyber assets embedded in the regional internet infrastructure executed a pre-planted denial-of-service cascade against the IP backbone nodes routing satellite uplink traffic for 2 forward-deployed U.S. Army battalions in Iraq. It was not a decisive cyber strike. It was a time-buying measure designed to create 11 minutes of confusion in U.S. Force Command networks while IRGC ground forces repositioned for the next phase. 11 minutes was all they needed, because at 0424 hours, in the waters of the Persian Gulf, the Iranian fast attack craft flotilla, 14 Hodon-class missile boats operating from their Bandar Abbas naval base dispersal pattern, armed with Noor anti-ship missiles and Nasser, 1 subsurface launch systems, executed a coordinated high-speed sprint toward the Strait of Hormuz choke point. Their objective was not to engage the U.S. carrier group. Their objective was to threaten the 17 commercial supertankers currently transiting the 39-kilometer-wide strait, force a halt to tanker traffic, and demonstrate to global energy markets that Iran had the physical capability to close the world's most critical maritime choke point at will. 1/5 of global oil supply passes through those 39 kilometers. The Brent crude price had already risen $23 per barrel in the previous 72 hours on the threat alone. A credible show of force in the strait, even without a single shot fired, would send the futures market into freefall. The U.S. Navy had prepositioned for exactly this contingency. NAVSEN Commander Vice Admiral Nicholas Salamano, operating from the 5th Fleet headquarters in Manama, had moved the USS Bataan Amphibious Ready Group to a position 70 nautical miles southwest of the strait 3 days earlier under the cover of a scheduled logistics transit. Aboard the USS Bataan, a Marine Expeditionary Unit stood ready with AV-8B Harrier II Plus close air support aircraft, specifically armed with AGM-65F Maverick Maritime variant missiles, optimized for the infrared signature of fast surface targets, and MH-60S Seahawk helicopters configured for surface warfare with Hellfire-L and 8 KWS rocket pods. When the Iranian fast attack flotilla began its sprint at 0424 hours, the Batan's Combat Information Center already had all 14 tracks painted with its SBS-67 surface search radar and had fed the targeting data to 2 P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft circling at 25,000 feet to the south. The P-8s each carried 4 AGM-84H SLAM-ER extended-range missiles with autonomous terminal guidance. They had been orbiting in a racetrack pattern since 2200 hours the previous night, fuel managed by a KC-135R tanker orbiting out of UAE airspace. The Iranian flotilla commander, IRGC Navy Commodore Nasser Shabatzi, did not know any of this. His electronic picture showed only civilian maritime traffic in the strait and the Batan's AS transponder signal, which identified the ship as a maritime prepositioning force vessel on routine patrol. The AIS signal was real. The threat envelope it concealed was not. At 0441 hours, the Hawkeye E-2D controlling the theater air picture transmitted a single encrypted directive to the 2 P-8A Poseidon aircraft, the MH-60S Flight of 4 from Bataan, and the Harrier section holding at 15,000 feet over international waters. The directive was 3 words in JDAC brevity code, cleared hot priori. In the next 6 minutes and 14 seconds, the U.S. Navy executed the most compressed maritime surface warfare action of the 21st century. The 2 P-8 has released all 8 SLAM-ER missiles in 2 sequential salvos. The Seahawks dived to 50 feet above the Gulf surface, below Iranian radar coverage, and accelerated to maximum airspeed, closing to Hellfire-L range. The Harriers pushed into a high-speed dive from altitude, floor-locked on the thermal signature of the Hodong boat's gas turbine exhausts. By 0447 hours, 11 of the 14 Iranian fast attack craft were mission-killed, the hulls pierced below the waterline or their propulsion systems destroyed, before a single one of them had achieved a firing solution on a tanker. The 3 surviving craft reversed course and fled northeast at maximum speed, one of them transmitting a distress call on the maritime emergency frequency. It was received by every ship in the strait. The tanker captains heard it. The global commodity markets heard it by 06:15 hours local London time when the story broke. Brent crude rose $14 in 4 minutes. At the same time, from the fortress island of Diego Garcia, now burning in 2 locations, its northwestern taxiway cratered, its perimeter fence breached by the blast overpressure. The surviving ground crews were pulling the remaining B-2 Spirits into hardened shelters. The 3 aircraft destroyed in the initial strike were confirmed total losses, but 9 more were intact, and on those aircraft maintainers were already hanging GBU 57A IB massive ordnance penetrators, the 30,000-pound bunker-busting weapon that is the only conventional munition in the U.S. arsenal capable of reaching Iran's deeply buried Fordow nuclear enrichment facility at 80 meters below solid granite. CENTCOM had placed the B-2 strike package on Fordow on alert hold, meaning a 90-minute launch-to-target timeline since March 4th. Whether it would be executed depended entirely on what happened in the next 24 hours around one geographic coordinate: Karg Island. Karg Island, 57 nautical miles northwest of Bushehr, Iran's primary crude oil export terminal, the hub through which 90% of Iranian petroleum exports flow, roughly 1.5 million barrels per day at pre-war production levels. According to an Axios report, confirmed by 3 independent intelligence officials, CENTCOM had submitted a formal execution plan to the National Security Council for the naval blockade and, if Iran refused to stand down, the physical occupation of Karg Island by U.S. Marine forces. The plan was designated Operation Iron Bridge. It called for a phased approach. First, a naval quarantine ring established by U.S. surface combatants, with mine countermeasure vessels clearing the approaches. Second, if Iran attempted to resume oil exports in violation of the blockade, a precision strike campaign against the island's pumping infrastructure and storage tank farms. Third, if Iran escalated with a retaliatory attack against Saudi or Emirati energy facilities, an amphibious assault by the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit to seize the island and place it under U.S. military control. The economic consequences of that third option were almost too large to model. Karg Island shut down. Iranian oil zero, combined with the Strait disruption risk, combined with the already elevated Brent futures. The IEA had already activated its emergency oil reserve release protocol, the first time it had done so since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and was publicly urging member nations to reduce highway speeds and avoid non-essential air travel. The words largest oil supply disruption in history were appearing in IEA statements. The global financial system was watching one atoll in the Persian Gulf and waiting. In Washington at 0900 hours EST, President Trump posted on Truth Social. The language was characteristically compressed, but its strategic signal was precise. We are getting very close to meeting our objectives as we consider winding down our great military efforts in the Middle East with respect to the terrorist regime of Iran. At the same time, an additional 2,200 U.S. Marines were wheels up from Camp Lejeune, aboard C-17s bound for the USS Boxer amphibious assault ship already steaming into the Red Sea. The contradiction was not lost on senior military analysts. A president discussing wind down while simultaneously expanding the Marine footprint. The answer lay in the operational logic of coercive deterrence. You do not negotiate from a position of escalatory restraint. You negotiate from the barrel of an Operation Iron Bridge execution order, sitting on the NSC conference table, signed and ready, with a 12-hour activation window. That was where the war stood on the morning of March 22, 2026. Day 23. The IRGC top spokesperson, Brigadier General Ali Mohammed Naini, had been killed by an Israeli precision strike earlier that week. One of a series of high-value leadership eliminations that was systematically dismantling the IRGC command layer that had survived the initial February 28 decapitation strikes. Bahrain's air defense forces reported they had destroyed a total of 143 missiles and 242 drones since hostilities began, a number that, when plotted on a depletion curve against known Iranian stockpile estimates, suggested Tehran was burning through its medium-range ballistic missile inventory at a rate that would become tactically limiting within 30 to 45 days. Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Defense reported intercepting 47 drones, 38 of them within a 3-hour window, in a concentrated saturation attack against its eastern province oil infrastructure. The attacks had failed to penetrate, but the Patriot Pack, 3 MSE batteries defending the Ras Tanura refinery, the single largest crude processing facility on Earth, had consumed 31 interceptors in 180 minutes, at a unit cost of $5.9 million per interceptor. That was $182.9 million of missile defense expenditure in one shift. The magazines were not infinite anywhere. This is the arithmetic of modern war that no general or president publicly discusses, but every serious defense analyst tracks with existential seriousness. The burn rate of precision interceptors versus the production rate of ballistic missiles. Iran produces Fateh-class ballistic missiles at an estimated 30 to 40 units per month in dispersed mountain production facilities. The United States produces PAC, 3 MSE interceptors at approximately 500 per year under current surge production, and those interceptors are shared across every allied nation in the theater. The gap between offensive production velocity and defensive interceptor replenishment is the single most dangerous number in this conflict, and Iran's IRGC aerospace planners know it precisely. The world has not faced a military escalation of this geographic scope, from Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean to the Strait of Hormuz, to the Golan Heights, to ballistic missiles falling 350 meters from the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, since the Second World War. In 23 days, the U.S.-Israeli campaign against Iran has killed at least 1,444 Iranians, including 204 children, according to ACOLD conflict data. Iran's counterstrikes have killed Israeli civilians in Ramat Gan, shattered windows in Tel Aviv, sent shrapnel into vineyard soil in the Golan Heights, and forced the closure of air corridors across the Gulf. UK bases on Cyprus went to Threkin Red twice in 5 days. The Diego Garcia strike demonstrated that no installation, regardless of distance or isolation, is outside the reach of a determined state actor with modern ballistic missile technology and the willingness to use it. The question that the U.S. National Security Council, the Israeli War Cabinet, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and every energy ministry in Europe is asking tonight is not whether this war will end. It will end. Every war ends. The question is what the world looks like when it does, whether the Strait of Hormuz becomes a permanently internationalized waterway, policed by a U.S.-led naval coalition, as Trump has publicly suggested, whether Iran's centrifuge capacity, its uranium stockpile, and its ballistic missile program survive this conflict in sufficient condition to reconstitute within a decade, whether the IRGC Quds force, depleted and decapitated but not destroyed, returns underground and begins the patient, generational process of rebuilding what was broken. Weapons can destroy facilities. They cannot destroy knowledge, and Iran has had that knowledge for 30 years. What would you do if you were CENTCOM commander right now? Execute Operation Iron Bridge and seize Karg Island, or hold the pressure and wait for Tehran to fracture from within? The next 72 hours will answer that question, and when they do, the global order that emerges from this crucible will be one none of us have ever lived in before. Stay sharp, stay informed, because the silence after the last missile lands is often louder and more dangerous than the war itself.